This episode of The Spiritual Edge is brought to you by Templeton Religion Trust. We're changing the conversation about religion, together with you and all who are curious. Join the conversation at templetonreligiontrust.org.
From KALW and The Spiritual Edge, this is Becoming Muslim.
Islam was probably the last religion I would have ever seen myself as converting to.
Revolutionary, the artistic, the creative, it's all intertwined.
I want to give back the slave master's name.
Your spirituality can be part of your political activism.
And he said, sister, for prayer, you're going to have to move. And I said, I'm not moving anywhere.
We have to remember who we are while we walk this path of Islam.
I didn't feel like I was learning about something new.
Nowhere does it tell us to discard who we are.
Ask who believes what you heard is the truth. And you stand up.
Stories of Americans who've chosen Islam. I'm Hanat Baba. I grew up mostly in the U.S., but I've also lived in my home country, Sudan, in East Africa. My parents wanted us to learn more about our heritage, our family, the language, and to just live the life. And there's this image I found striking every time I saw it. We would drive by this university, an Islamic university, and I'd see all these men standing outside. They were clearly not from Sudan. Many of them were white. Now, these were international students, and many of them were converts coming from Western countries, from Europe, from the U.S. They came to Sudan to study Arabic and the Quran, and it always intrigued me that they flew so far from their homes for this knowledge. Our first episode of Becoming Muslim takes us just north of Sudan to Cairo. Reporter Jad Khalil knows the city well. He wanted to understand more about what American converts experience there.
There are a lot of different versions of Cairo, the city. Foreigners usually think about it as a place of history, minarets and pyramids, which it is. But they're often struck by traffic, sprawl, and smog when they get there. It's definitely a grind of a city to live in, but that means liveliness and energy, ups and downs. The city doesn't make it easy, but the best attempt to get it to love you is if you love it back. It takes some getting used to, though.
When I first came to Cairo, I was not a fan. I came and I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing?
This is Michelle. She's 35 and became Muslim about 10 years ago. She's part of a growing number of white women converting to Islam. She came to Cairo to study in 2019. Despite her initial misgivings about the place, Michelle's anxieties were soothed away by how much easier it is to be Muslim in Cairo than back home in Columbus, Ohio, especially the little daily things.
I know, if I'm eating a gummy bear, that it doesn't have gelatin, that is filled with pork. People understand the need to stop and pray. I'm not working in an American workforce where sometimes I have to explain the reason that I need a quick 5-minute break to go pray.
Michelle ended up studying at a school in Muqattam, which is a neighborhood on the plateau overlooking Cairo. On a clear day in the right spot, you can see the 3 pyramids of Giza and all the minarets, old and new, that fill up the city with the call to prayer. To Egyptians, the call to prayer is the definition of something daily, something normal. But to Michelle, it was something special.
I'm able to hear the adhan 5 times a day out loud. It's not just a recording on my phone, and you hear it all over the city from various masajid or mosques.
It was at one of those mosques that another American convert, Deanna Demchemko, had an experience that started changing the way she thought about Islam. When she tells the story, she uses the Arabic word for mosque, masjid.
So the first Friday that I was there, a friend of mine basically told me, the first Jummah, make sure to go to this masjid. It's the most beautiful thing.
Deanna's 29, has pale blue eyes and a rosy complexion to match her disposition. She's got a little gap in her teeth like I do. When she told me about this mosque over the phone, it almost sounded like she was leaning forward, telling me a secret.
As you walk into a hallway And the lighting inside is, at this point, is natural lighting. And while you're through this hallway, it's actually more dim.
It's a famous 14th century mosque, built as a place for study and prayer.
Blowing your way, and all of a sudden, you reach the end of the hallway, the end of the tunnel, and it just opens up into this huge courtyard. It's the most beautiful courtyard you've ever seen. There's a fountain in the middle.
Part of what makes these really old and historic sites of learning, like Cairo, so exciting and attractive is that you have places like Sultan Hassan.
This is Zarina Grewal. She's an anthropologist at Yale University.
And so to imagine all of these, not just great luminaries, but just so many people who have passed through that same spot and have contemplated and have prayed and have learned is a powerful experience.
When I was living in Cairo, I didn't spend much time with converts, but Zarina Grewal did. She wrote a book called Islam is a Foreign Country, about American Muslims that studied overseas. She says these trips can change the way that they see their own religion.
You know, when you're coming from a place like the U.S. where, you know, you have the daily onslaught of anti-Muslim racism and horrific news of warfare and all this other stuff, to be able to be in a place where Islam is beautiful architecture, Islam is a thriving culture, Islam is jokes and food and traditions and family and the banal.
Deanna, the convert that you heard describing the Mosque of Sultan Hassan, would discover all of this for herself over the course of several months in Cairo. In the fall of 2019, she went there to study the Quran. She's been exploring her faith in greater and greater depth since she converted in college a decade before. I got to know Deanna over the course of a few interviews. Usually I'd sit down with her, but because of COVID, that was ruled out.
So I'm just gonna start a recording session right now.
So we connected remotely, and Deanna sent me videos of what she thought jumped out to her about Cairo.
Yeah, I can hear you.
I wanted to know, why did Deanna become Muslim? How did that change her life? And how does an American convert feel like they're being a real Muslim? For people who've grown up in communities with an Islamic tradition, there's an intense connection to the religion. But if Islam's not around growing up, what is it like to develop that kind of connection when you're older? Deanna was game to help us try to understand all that. And we'll get back to what happened to her in Cairo. But first, let's hear about her childhood.
I was just always interested in religion, just, I guess, to begin with.
Deanna was born in Ukraine to a Russian family and moved to Michigan when she was 8. Coming from a former Soviet republic, she was intrigued by American religiosity. If an American is described as religious, chances are that a certain kind of Christianity comes to mind. It's a kind of a standard placeholder in the American imagination for religion. Deanna's family was Christian on paper, but it was more about tradition than theology. She admits her understanding of the faith was limited.
Okay, there was God. Okay, there were prophets who were sent. I don't know their names, but there were some, and they had a message to worship God. Okay, there was Jesus. The end.
Deanna's really good at talking about serious religious questions with a light heart. Here she sounds like she's joking around, but things like religious holidays did really intrigue her. She thought a lot about where culture ends and God begins. Take Easter, for example.
What does this holiday actually mean? Or what is kind of the reality of life in general? Or what is God? Who is God? Is God real?
Deanna started going to church, 2 churches actually, in her family's new home in Michigan. There she heard that Jesus was divine. In her free time, she picked up Genesis, and her reading of that said that there was only one God. So she was confused and went to her pastor.
All right, Genesis says this. Jesus said this, but you're doing something different. What's up? But then the answer would be, well, Jesus is God, so we are worshiping God. And so that just never sat with me. And I always kind of felt like that came from a place of, you know what, just don't worry about it. Just don't think about it.
So Deanna did what any self-respecting, inquisitive teen would have done. She didn't take that advice and kept thinking about these questions. She started reading about Islam and realizing that it shared certain characteristics with Christianity. She downloaded the Quran as an app, and she liked what she read.
In the Quran, basically the synopsis of the faith is worship God. Don't worship anyone but God. don't ascribe partners to God, which was basically the same synopsis that I got from Genesis. That sat very warmly with me, very closely with me.
Deanna was still asking the big questions when she went to college at Michigan State University.
What is all of this? What are thoughts? What is the soul? What is life? What is God? Who is God? Is God real? What is all of this? What are thoughts? What is the soul? What is life?
In her sophomore year, she met Khalid, an international student from Saudi Arabia, and she started texting and emailing him lots of questions.
I'm like reading the Quran and I'm like, what does this mean? And it's like a word that's like maybe in Arabic and like not translated. And he's like, let me try to understand, or let me try to figure it out. And like the poor kid.
Gradually, Deanna gained a better understanding of Islam.
It continued to feel close and it continued to feel warm and it continued to feel very familiar with what I was reading before. I didn't feel like I was learning about something new.
A lot of stories in the Quran retell Christian and Jewish tradition. And as they talked, Khalid must have realized how much Deanna cared about these stories and how they were treated.
He was like, you know what, like you actually care about this stuff. Why don't you just like become Muslim? And I'm like, oh, I never thought about that. That's an interesting concept.
Usually when people decide to convert to Islam, they do it in a mosque or in front of friends. But Deanna did not do it that way.
Literally one day, it was Sunday night. I was at the library at school trying to study. And I just thought, you know what? I think I'll just be Muslim. And I texted him and I'm like, okay, I'll be Muslim. And we weren't even talking or anything. Like, it was just like me just randomly texting this guy, like, I don't know, at like 2 a.m. or something. He's like, oh, okay. And he's like, give me a second. I'm going to email you something. And he basically just like emails me the Shahada, which is like the testament of faith. And he's like, all right, say this.
Saying or taking the Shahada basically marks the point at which a convert becomes Muslim. A lot of people say it in Arabic, but Khalid emailed her the Shahada in English.
It's basically just like, I believe that there's no one worthy of worship but God, and I believe that Muhammad is his prophet and messenger. And then I'm like, okay, I said it. He's like, congratulations.
And that was it. Deanna converted.
Over a text/email/ me just being by myself in the library, like at like 2 a.m. being hyper on coffee.
So now that Deanna said her Shahada, she's Muslim. But she knew that being Muslim wasn't just a matter of saying so. There were things she felt like she needed to do in order to remake herself as a Muslim.
I was also so hungry to learn about the religion, and I felt like I was going through kind of like a worldview rehab.
Deanna's 20s would be spent trying to figure out what being Muslim actually looks like on a daily basis. And she wanted to do that as quickly as possible, to make up for lost time. Deanna was so eager to be what she believed. If the beliefs and ethics Islam preaches were true, the daily rituals, habits, and deeds must be true too, she thought.
You're listening to Becoming Muslim, a series from KALW's The Spiritual Edge. You can hear more great stories like the one you're hearing right now by subscribing to The Spiritual Edge on your podcast player, or ask your smart speaker to play The Spiritual Edge. Now, back to the story.
First off was an important thing to learn. 5 times a day, Muslims are obligated to pray and should ritually wash beforehand. Khalid, that Saudi student, had to show her the ropes.
For prayer, like you make wudu, which is like you just kind of like, I don't know, just wash your face and just kind of wash yourself like to prepare for prayer. And he's like, okay, you're going to wash your mouth, wash your nose, wash this, wash that. And then you're going to come back out and then we're going to pray. Okay, now repeat what I just told you.
Prayer is kind of a bridge between a public display of faith and private internal contemplation. Once the rituals were down, Deanna says she felt more at home in her new religion, but not around everyone. Plenty of college students are reserved about their lives around their parents, and Deanna's version of that had to do with dressing modestly and wearing the hijab.
When I was around my mom, like I wouldn't wear the headscarf, but I would definitely be like a little more covered up. And she would just be like, okay, I think Deanna has a Muslim boyfriend. That must be what it is.
It became harder to keep up hijab and conceal her religion from mom, especially after they moved together to sunny Orange County, California.
So I'd be like, nope, I'm not Muslim. I like long shirts in the summer heat. I didn't know how my mom would react or how the rest of my family would react.
Her Russian family, and her grandma in particular, knew that American Muslims outwardly displaying their faith stick out. Her grandma ended up being okay with having a Muslim granddaughter, but she had one piece of advice that came from her Soviet background. Don't stand out to avoid attracting attention. There's an American version of this too. Islam has been turned into something foreign in the US, especially since 9/11. White converts that we talk to often said they get the same question people of color do. Where are you really from? Even though her family became more understanding, she was still alone in her faith and trying to fill a spiritual void and trying really hard.
Like, I felt like I needed to be doing 100 things, every day that are Muslimi, quote unquote, because I have so much that I missed out on.
Deanna also started checking out mosques in Orange County, searching for community.
So like if Mondays there was like this kind of a class at one mosque and then Tuesday there was like another kind of a class at a different mosque, I would just hit up both of them.
Islam is a universal religion. Anyone can be Muslim. But Deanna thought she saw an idea of what being authentically Muslim was at these mosques, full of Southern California immigrant communities.
I was being an American Muslim, but I was also kind of like, oh, but being Arab is better, or being Pakistani is better, or something about their culture is just inherently more righteous somehow. And because I want to be righteous, I want to do the thing that seems more righteous, right? I don't remember if it was subliminal messaging, if it was just my own weird thinking, if it was something explicit. I don't remember honestly how I got that thought.
To me, it makes sense that Deanna would think this. A lot of American institutions, whether that's in media or government, talk about Islam as something new, something different. So it makes sense that Islamic authenticity might seem foreign in origin to a newcomer like Deanna. Here's what Zarina Grewal, the anthropologist, had to say about that.
How is it that Islam is sort of seen as so fundamentally foreign, and then the idea that Muslims belong somewhere else, and that there is an actual place that is this real actual place called the Muslim world, and that's become a kind of sort of political fact, even though it's not an actual real fact, right? And the thing is that that's been absorbed both by the American public at large, politicians, but also in many ways by American Muslims themselves. They talk about the Muslim world as if it is a real thing.
Real or not, the idea of an authentic Islam somewhere else creates a strong pull. For Deanna, that pull was connected to language and wanting to be able to read the Arabic of the Quran.
I love the translation and it's great, but when you have the real deal, nothing compares to it.
Islamic law is most basically determined by two things: the Quran and the Hadith, which are the stories of the Prophet Muhammad that were passed down. They were first written down in Arabic, so that gives clergy a bit of enhanced access to scripture. It's kind of like a Catholic priest with Latin or a rabbi with Hebrew. Deanna wanted that enhanced access too.
I basically just had an itch of I really wanted to go study somehow, somewhere, in some way, shape, or form.
Deanna wasn't alone in that. Jews and Christians go on gap years to study abroad all the time. But Zarina Grewal says there's something different about Muslims that are going abroad.
Their nature of their study is quite different. There's this notion that you're able to access a kind of concealed or hidden or missing older way of learning that is diminished in the kind of modern world. And it's this sort of hidden world. And that's what these American Muslim student travelers really want to get at.
What also makes these student travelers unique is that they're often dropping into a place where they don't know anyone. And perhaps that's part of the appeal.
I don't think I've ever stalked people on Instagram and just reached out to complete strangers asking, hey, have you ever been to this country before? I think you have. Can you tell me about it?
And that basically is how Deanna ended up in Cairo. As she moved into her new apartment there, she recorded a short video. She's in a blue hijab, her belongings are at her feet, and a prayer in Arabic plays on the elevator speaker.
Best moving ever.
When I heard this, what jumped out to me was the out-of-tune elevator chime. But what Deanna liked most was hearing that prayer. Cairo has so much energy, sound, and smells that sometimes you can't even notice them. Islam is kind of the same. Its presence switches from being front and center and being so ordinary it's almost invisible. When Deanna arrived in Egypt, she found a vibrant scene.
so many students there, and I didn't expect it at all. I met students from all over the world, like literally all over the world, from the States, from Netherlands, France, UK.
Zarina Grewal said it's hard to count, but there were probably upwards of 1,000 American students like Deanna coming to Egypt each year before the Arab Spring disrupted that flow. And the students weren't just from the US.
Malaysia, Singapore, Indonesia, New Zealand, Thailand, South Africa, Senegal, like everywhere.
One thing that brings a lot of students to Cairo is that it's had an operating university and teaching system since the 10th century. Some students were there just to memorize the Quran.
They weren't even focused on Arabic. They were just like, I just want to memorize, and here it's easier to do it.
Some, like Deanna, were there to study the Arabic of the Quran. Vocab, grammar, syntax.
You could say like alama versus allama or a'lama.
And some classmates were just there.
Chilling and just hanging out.
When Deanna got out into the city, she had to confront what she thought she knew about Islam. Remember that beautiful mosque her first week in Cairo? Well, she went next door to another mosque, the Rafai Mosque.
Every inch of the building has some kind of a design, some kind of an etching, some kind of an artwork, whether it's the lighting that's the artwork, whether it's the way that the wall is painted, and the colors inside. Oh my God, they're just so beautiful. And you're standing and you just can't take your eyes off of the place.
When Deanna visited the Rafai Mosque, she came across something special.
There was actually a mawlid going on there, and I was like, whoa!
A mawlid is a celebration of a religious figure. Sometimes they're referred to as saint festivals. In Egypt and Sudan, they're huge parties with carnival games, street food, and parades. But of course, there's a religious part. Charity, religious songs, and in some cases, rhythmic dancing that puts people into trances to remember God. Mawlids are often associated with Sufism, which is a mystical way of thinking about Islam. Roots in mysticism and folklore mean that some other preachers and their followers don't approve of it. And other Muslim traditions just don't really celebrate Mawlids. When Deanna was in the US, she said Muslims that she knew demonized Sufis.
Like in the first month or two of me being Muslim and just trying to understand anything, I remember somebody was like, okay, here's some advice for the rest of your life. Stay away from Sufis, they do weird stuff.
I noticed something about Deanna, that even though she was taught, or rather told certain things about Islam, she kept an open mind. When she encountered Sufism in real life, it spoke to her existential curiosity about being.
The Tasawwuf side of things more kind of teaches you okay, here's from an internal perspective, from your heart perspective, okay, why do people die? Why do scary things happen to us?
As Deanna was getting more interested in Sufism, she was joining other Muslims in a global marketplace of ideas, according to Zarina Grewal.
Well, what kind of community is the right fit, or what is the learning, what network will you choose to study with? Because to decide who to study with is to say, in a way, what kind of Islam do you find to be most authentic?
As Deanna got deeper into her faith and met more Muslims and became more devout, she was less concerned with being outwardly religious. Cairo gave her a new confidence and perspective to practice Islam on her own terms, rather than looking for an exact framework to emulate. When I was speaking to Zarina Grewal, she said that sometimes white American converts like Deanna were treated differently, either as a kind of redemptive victory over America, or an object of suspicion that they weren't fully Muslim. Deanna said she never felt that way.
I've never had a situation where I felt like the person was trying to see if I'm a real Muslim, quote unquote. People would be out of just curiosity asking oh, do you read Quran, or do you know how to say this? There was a taxi driver who he could tell that I'm obviously not Egyptian from the way that I'm speaking, struggling to speak. And he asked me what I'm doing here, what I'm up to, things like that. And he's like, oh my God, you read Quran? Oh, can you read something for me? So I start reading the chapter of the cave, which a lot of Muslims read on Fridays. And we just started reading it together, popcorn style. I read a few lines, he read a few lines. I read a few lines, he read a few lines. And he was doing it with so much heart and so much smile and so much happiness.
Deanna's tag team recitation with that driver was in the first week of 2020. Little did she, or any of us for that matter, know that her time in Cairo was about to come to an abrupt end. Because of the COVID-19 pandemic, she had to come home to California, and was more or less kicked out of this new, refreshing environment of being around so many Muslims. But she had been there long enough to learn something important.
The more Muslims that you're around and the more Muslims that you see just living their lives and being practicing Muslims and just seeing how Islam interacts in their life really definitely did help me to understand, like, okay, Islam is not about doing 100 things in a day that are quote unquote Muslimy things.
A lot of the transformation that happens for people when they're overseas doing this kind of soul searching and studying of their religion is precisely that process of saying, you know, there isn't X number of books or X number of hoops that I can jump through to finally feel Muslim. I really have to understand that I'm not going to get closer to God just because I'm in Damascus. I have to be able to feel close to God in Detroit too.
For all of Deanna's new confidence and sense of community, my sense is that she's going to keep searching.
Islam is such an ocean of knowledge that I feel like I've barely even put my pinky in it. I want to be able to look back at my life and be in a place where, that I'll have a purer, better, more loving, more beautiful heart. And so it's a lifelong journey for sure. How that will look like exactly, I'm not sure. I hope to be able to continue to learn however that will look like and wherever that will be.
That story was produced by Jad Khalil. Next time on Becoming Muslim, we meet the woman who wouldn't take no for an answer.
When it came time for prayer, he walked up to me and he said, "Sister," and he said it really loud. The room was full of people. "Sister, for prayer, you're going to have to move." And I said, "I'm not moving anywhere."
That's coming up on the next episode of Becoming Muslim. Becoming Muslim is a project of the Spiritual Edge podcast at KALW Public Radio. Support for the series comes from the Templeton Religion Trust. Jeb Sharp is the editor, Tariq Foda is the sound engineer, Lindsay Myers-Humley is the digital content manager, Tom Levy is the photographer, our executive editor is Judy Silber. Thanks also to Katie McCutcheon and Jad Khalil for help with research for the series. We're grateful to the experts who helped us along the way, including Edward Curtis, Juliette Gallonier, Zarina Grewal, Sajida Jalalzai, Hind Mekki, Bashir Mohammed, Harold Morales, Spirit, and Kayla Wheeler. Pod ops by Megan Jones. Jeffrey Burke-Witten did our logo. Thank you to Ben Trefny, the news director at KALW, and to Matt Martin, who helped conceive of the series. To hear more stories from this series, check out our complete archive, including other stories about religion from around the world at thespiritualedge.org. We're also on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. Thanks for listening. I'm Hannah Baba.